All right, everybody, welcome to the first workshop of the day. Thanks, Steve, for that earlier keynote. Very insightful. Always love the energy that that team brings. Just a little bit about me. My name is Limaris Torres. I'm a blockchain research and development engineer at Blockdaemon. My expertise is in blockchain, cybersecurity, incident response, computer networking, managing mischief, and general tinkering, as well as education. So as Steve said, I'll be leading the SANS SEC 554 class with the other Steve later this year, and I'm very excited to do that. So if you find yourself craving more information about this that we're covering today, feel free to sign up and join us later. TLDR, hacker turn builder. So this is our outline for today. We're going to spend about 30 minutes going high level, a little bit in depth on certain topics, but we're going to try to keep it high level for this just because it is only 30 minutes and I'm not sure my audience's technical expertise. We're going to go over what is infrastructure, and that is very important for us to define so that we know what to expect from this exact track. We're going to go over ecosystem challenges because blockchain, innovative emerging spaces are always so much fun. We're going to discuss common issues with security in different ecosystems and things that we're seeing and mistakes that we're seeing a lot of operators make. We're going to discuss some best practices, simple things so you can take home, food for thought. And then we're going to discuss the future and what we think that will look like. So, brace yourself. Now you're going to know better. So, in terms of infrastructure, what this talk is, I'm missing half of my stuff. So this talk is, why is that not showing on my screen? About nodes, validators, and miners. This talk is not about smart contracts, okay? So someone else in a different track is doing a talk about smart contract hacking. Someone else is doing a talk about DAOs and NFTs. So this is not a talk about smart contract security. This is nodes, validators, miners, and infrastructure, whatever else we want to call it, that we use on the blockchain for consensus, for validating transactions, and for operating the ecosystem. All right, so let's get into some ecosystem challenges, right? So blockchain, as you know, is an up and coming, it's already here, whatever you want to call it, industry. And we're growing so rapidly and so unsustainably. But it's very exciting to see all these new projects come up every day. It's very excited to see all the new use cases that people are coming up with and the different, now ZK proofs are like the thing to talk about, and that changes by the day and by the month. So we have a lot of builders who lack enterprise experience, but are trying to build at enterprise scale without the benefit con, depending on how you look at it, of centralization. And so for security purposes, centralization is sometimes a little easier to manage just because it's less risk to think about. But in blockchain, this chain is run by anons, and the effort put in by different people is very different. So we can't exactly control security 100% on chain. Availability is also important. We want to make sure that the network is always up and running. We hate when we have network outages due to, denial of service attacks or system failures. And, it happens to everybody, but not calling out any blockchain in specific, but our chains are run by out of sync parties and anons, and the ones that run a little bit more successfully, even if we don't like to think so, they're a little bit more centralized. And so how do we kind of come to this consensus amongst ourselves where we say this is the standard that we want to run it at, and this is how we're going to make sure that we're all in sync? And well, it's hard when there's a low barrier of entry, especially a low barrier of entry for security to become an operator, right? Anybody can just Google how to launch an Ethereum node or how to launch a Cosmos Solana node, and bam, shazam, as long as they can buy the hardware, piece something together, they're an operator in the space, which is kind of crazy. It's amazing. And it's kind of what I love about blockchain, because there's so many opportunities and it's so inclusive, but it's also a pain, a huge pain, because we have no standard of anything. And because anybody can come and build, and there's no, and when I say standard, I mean standard of quality. There's no quality standard. We end up with a shoestring and bubblegum network. And what I mean by that is we end up with a lot of, improper patches, some things that are not necessarily best practices, things that are good ideas but are poorly executed. And I don't want to call out any projects in specific, but it will be hard to focus on having good availability and a healthy ecosystem until we push ourselves to up our game on who is an operator and who is not an operator. And you'll see that a lot with like shit coins and stuff, the shoestring and bubblegum network. You buy a token, you can't even liquidate. There's like the token, the nodes are all out of sync. You can't even validate transactions. Sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down. It's unreliable, it's unsustainable, and that's definitely not what we want our ecosystems to look like. We also want to make sure that we're operating at high efficiency, but again, there's no international norms established. Some node chains or some foundations are doing a better job at saying like, hey, these should be the minimum requirements, and please make sure that you're up to date on your OS, but there's no requirement for that to keep being an operator in this space yet. Also, we're built for consensus, which is really cool as a concept, but really scary because we've seen it get hijacked on some smaller projects and on some smaller networks. And there's a variety of different ways that when your infrastructure is compromised, be it by improper authentication or open ports that were unnecessary, or timestamp attacks, or whatever the case may be. If you're hijacked and if you're running more than one and you're controlling them all with the same tool, if you're hijacked and this is a smaller network, then that gives consensus to the attackers, right? And that's the risk, and they can start validating improper stuff. So that's not ideal. So one of our favorite features ends up being something that's hard to fix if it does get hijacked. And also, another ecosystem challenge that's a pet peeve, but also something I love, is that we all build using the same exact template, right? We all just go onto a foundation website or a GitHub page, and we just git pull and we download and we install and we do whatever. And we're all using the same exact template with the same exact SSH keys and the same exact passwords and the same exact everything. And no one's actually hardening it. And now, yes, we all have different private keys, but if you're not hardening your system, you're still leaving yourself open to a lot of other risks, right? It's like, what's the point of locking your front door if the window next to it is wide open? So food for thought here on, my love-hate relationship with blockchain. Now let's talk about some common security issues, right? And sorry, administrators, I don't mean to call you out, but I'm calling you out. And unfortunately, a lot of people like to blame attackers, and a lot of people like to say, well, we're having this third-party risk assessment done because we're scared of getting hacked. When in reality, you should be scared of your admins. And a lot of people say like, oh, well, what if we train them and they leave? And I like to say, well, what if we don't and they stay? Personally, I think that's scarier, but here, let's go over some common administrator errors. And, I'm guilty of some of these, especially when learning and you don't know better and there's not really good documentation out there. So broken authentication. Things like default passwords, you're not rotating your passwords, improper key management. I mean, it's incredible the amount of times that I've seen in this industry that someone loses access to their stuff because they did not save their keys. So just, please don't be that person. Power and physical issues, right? If you're operating out of your closet, that's fine. We all have our little mining rig shops at home, but you want to make sure that power is available, and you have like a UPS or something, or you have at least a reliable power grid. And you want to protect yourself from physical issues like fire hazards if they're all together in your closet and there's no proper ventilation, or water damage if they're somewhere in a closet that shares a wall with the bathroom. These are very simple things that make a big difference. And if I mention them here, it's because I've heard stories about these types of issues go wrong. Code bugs that make infrastructure weak. I know I said this is not a smart contract security course. However, your code can make your infrastructure weak. So do go on and sign up for one of those smart contract review classes after this, please. Unnecessary ports. Some chains by default have some ports open, some chains don't. Some chains by default require authentication to tap into that port, and some chains don't, which is really scary. So make sure that you're properly managing whoever has access to your infrastructure. And another one that, as an operator, we often get into a pickle about is centralized decentralization. And so what does that mean? That means that these huge node operators, like these big exchanges, not to hate on anybody, just using an example like Coinbase, who runs thousands and thousands and thousands of nodes, or any other major player in the space, or even maybe you at home if you've got your own. I have a coworker who has their own industrial grade mining facility as well, right? If you're using one single tool to manage 1,000 or more nodes at the same time, it might be in your best interest to make sure that that tool is battle hardened, and to make sure that whatever centralized app you're using to manage all of these decentralized nodes, or supposedly decentralized ecosystems, that they are secure, that you are the only one that has access to it, that it can't be something that's accessed from outside of your environment. And again, configuration issues. If you don't properly follow the manual that comes with the GitHub page, or if you don't properly follow the instructions of whatever code you're copy pasting or whatever it is, or you download a new EVM and you spin it up, but you're like, oh, you get overconfident and you're like, I kind of know what I'm doing, and there was an update and there was a little configuration that you forgot to do. Most security issues happen because the administrators were unaware of something. I don't like to blame administrators. I like to say they didn't know better. So if you are an administrator, if you are an operator here, do your best part to educate yourself. And it's important that we all work together with this decentralized ecosystem built by anons and randos to make sure that we have a consistent level of quality so that the network can be reliable. There's a lot of exciting things happening, and I want to make sure that we keep building together. All right, and now security issues with attackers. So things that we've seen that are kind of crazy: malware on chain. Like malware on chain, that's an issue that you should be worried about from these attackers, be them nation states or just random hacker groups, whatever the case is. Malware is a big issue. Denial of service attacks are a big issue because they can take a network down. Port scanning, very popular. If you just have a little bit of monitoring, you'd be able to detect if someone's trying to scan your ports and hijack your infrastructure. Consensus hijacking, again, once they take over enough nodes, once they take over enough validators, they can hijack consensus for a chain or for a part of a chain. Timestamp attacks, it used to be more popular. Network attacks, bridge hacks, there's all sorts of different things. The difference is the blue side we can control, and the red side we can prepare for, but we can not control. Now, the bread and butter, what we really came here for today, for our little checklist of what we should be doing. Here are some administrator best practices that I've learned over the years through lots of research, by speaking with other folks in this industry, and just by seeing enough meltdowns for a lifetime. I have this divided into 3 different levels. And there's no shame if you find yourself identified to one side and would like to get to the more mature side. Okay, we all start somewhere. So I have this broken down into noob, enthusiast, and mature. So noob administrators, they're just the copy pastors. They're the ones that just are learning, and I'm gonna say they're innocent and don't know better. Some people would disagree. They're just learning, they're just following instructions. They didn't really secure their private keys, so maybe they're saved in a .txt file on their computer, or they saved it in the notes app on their cell phone, or something that's not ideal. They leave those unnecessary ports open. They have the generic SSH key because everybody downloaded the same image of a VM from a random page online for a project. Okay, don't be that person. They're using the default API. Their operating system is not up to date. I know that we don't really have a lot of operating systems, but we do, sorry, that we don't have a lot of operating system updates, but it is important that when they happen, we do stay up to date. And they'll just use cloud for everything, which is centralized and then like defeats the purpose of decentralization. But anyway, and more importantly, they have no backup plan. So if shit hits the fan and everything crashes and they get hacked, there's nothing that they can do. I'd say most of us here fall into the enthusiast column though, right? Where we keep up with the alpha on Twitter, we keep up with the reactive updates. And when we see our favorite foundation say like, hey, there's a new release, make sure you upgrade so that you're protected from this. That's what we're doing. We're also set and forgetters. And, you know, I'm guilty of this too at the beginning of my career. You're like, well, I followed the document on how to secure my infra. And I did that like last year, so I'm fine, right? No, no, like new vulnerabilities and stuff come up all the time. So you need to make sure that you're regularly following different security pages or security news to make sure that you do update or make those new configuration changes as they come up. So you're not susceptible to some of those more popular attacks. Enthusiasts, there's usually no or some very little monitoring, and the monitoring is usually not really going to help them with an intrusion. It's more like, am I producing blocks, right? And so that's cool. But if you're not producing blocks, that's not necessarily an indication of security and of health. And it can be a red flag, but it's not enough to kind of determine, well, what's wrong with my infrastructure? They might have a strong password that they set 5 years ago. And you know, that's half the battle, but we need to make sure that we're rotating our passwords on a regular basis. They might have a backup image somewhere, but it isn't synced. And so again, that just defeats the purpose. So you were like halfway there, but you didn't know that you regularly have to sync your backups just so that when you actually restore a backup or like turn on a backup, it actually works. And usually enthusiasts, you know, if you're here, you're self-hosting your bare metal, which is pretty cool. But like I said before, beware of those fire hazards if you're self-hosting bare metal in your house. And a more mature administrator here in the green, you know, this is kind of the advice that you'd get if you'd work with someone like Hallborn, who's working with Sans to put this together. They'd say, you know, if you want to be a mature organization, you should have continuous monitoring, continuous patching, you should have automated tooling. And what do those mean? That means continuous monitoring of who's logging into your infrastructure, continuous monitoring of if you, so you can get alerted if your ports are being scanned so that you can be reactive, right? And you can do something and respond to that incident. Continuous patching, meaning every single time there's an update, you are on the ball. Automated tooling, so that if you are managing more than one at home, you know, there's automated but not necessarily centralized. So you're a little bit more advanced, and when you do push those updates across all your nodes, it's a little easier, because if it's easier for you to do it, you're more likely to do it. And that's kind of what we want in security. We want to make security easy for you, so you're encouraged to do it. They have proper password rotation, which is not that hard. You know, every 3 months, change a password, make it another secure password. They have load balancing, very important. They have reliable power. They have local intrusion monitoring. So if someone logs in and it's not them, they'd be aware. And they'd also have an infrastructure as code rollup for easy redeploy. Again, so if you're self-hosting, be it as a business or as an individual operator, I'm assuming most people listening to this here are in some sort of business. Maybe you have an NFT marketplace and you have 100 different nodes, validators, whatever the case is. Make sure that you have some sort of code rollout for your infrastructure so that if anything does happen, you can very easily redeploy. Bouncing back is a very important plan to have for security purposes, because otherwise the bad folks might beat you to it. The attackers might beat you to it and just hijack everything. So do make sure that you have a recovery plan. And sorry, logistics questions. Okay, thank you, Corrigan, for letting me know. And so let's talk about the future now. This is my crystal ball. It's a little foggy. Can't really see what's going to happen. I wish I could. I'd be a lot more prepared if I knew what was coming. But what I know for sure today is we need to do better. Okay, as an industry, we have to mature. We're having a lot of fun. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of money being thrown around, but we need to do better so that we can stick around for the long haul. Ecosystem foundations need to set basic security standards. There should be something from the Ethereum Foundation or the Solana Foundation or Cosmos or whoever saying, hey, these are the security best practices for being an operator with us. And these are the minimum things that you should be doing. And it can be a checklist, kind of like what I just had. But if it doesn't come from them, then a lot of the newer users who, like I said, low barrier of entry, they won't know better and they'll never figure it out. So we need to make sure that we're getting ahead of the problem. We need more education in the community and DevOps as well. And when I say education, I mean really understand what we're building and how this stuff works, because everyone thinks Web3 is different, but a lot of hacks that are happening are Web2 hacks happening on Web3 projects, okay? So we need to make sure that we are educating our developers, that we're encouraging our developers to learn new tricks, and we're encouraging our DevOps team to stay on top of monitoring. Regulation is incoming, but it's not the solution, because unfortunately, by the time that the regulators actually can agree on what the regulation is going to be, the information is outdated. So they might be telling us about civil attacks on Bitcoin, and everybody might be using some other new ecosystem that popped up just in the last 6 months, because that's how blockchain works. We need to control FOMO, okay? Controlling FOMO is probably the biggest hurdle that I've personally encountered when advising for security for some of my friends. And that's because everybody wants to push to prod as fast as possible so that they can pump and they can, be profitable and be the first to go to market and be the first innovative buzzword here, buzzword there. But we really need to make sure that we control that FOMO and that we establish healthy timelines for building so that we can make time as part of that build process, as part of that DevOps process, to analyze what we're building before we release it so we can catch any bugs. And also so we can trust but verify, right? We want to rely on third parties for security reviews. We want to rely on experts in their field. I don't know everything. And so when I need help with something, I contact an expert, and I would advise you to do the same. Whoever you want, just make sure that you're relying on a third party for security review and on someone who didn't build something to check if something's actually secured. That way you can verify that the logic is correct, and that way you can save yourself a world of pain going forward, okay? So companies like Hallborn or others that you can find out there would be great. Just make sure that you have a security review done at some point before you release something to the world that's going to be used by thousands of people. Please, I beg you. Otherwise, this is why we have bridge hacks, left and right. So moral of the story is, what I would like to see in the future is for us to continue building fast, but for us to learn to also build safe, and so that we can make innovating safe again. And instead of blockchain news every week on, the headlines that your family that are not in blockchain are reading, it's like, oh my God, but why do you work in blockchain? Isn't blockchain always getting hacked? Well, hopefully then we can change the narrative and the headlines can be like, look at this new innovative thing, look at this new innovative thing. We really need to overcome all of our security issues so that we can gain the trust of the larger community and we can gain the mass adoption that we're all striving for.